Okay, we need to talk about the tools you'll need to learn C programming. And the basic tools you'll need, whatever your operating system is a compiler, a C compiler, and an editor. And a simpler editor is better, an editor that's a plain text editor. You can, of course, use something like Microsoft Word, provided that you store things in plain text. Microsoft Word is an intelligent editor. It adds all sorts of funky characters. A C compiler doesn't expect that, and so that would confuse it a lot. So if you're going to work on something like Windows, you can use typically a compiler like Notepad. Okay, what are the tools? A tool, for example, that's a C compiler that's freely available and generally can be installed on most any computer system, is the GNU compiler. The GNU compiler has as its command GCC, or, of course, the other major system you're likely to be on is Windows system, and there you can get very good tools directly from Microsoft, and they're probably the best tool would be a form of Visual Studios. Okay. Now, what I'm not going to do in this class is go into detail about different compilers, little nuances for the compiler, how to install the compiler. All of these things are required. In many cases, the install procedure is no more complicated than getting a package and just following the instructions that typically will install what you need. But if that's not your level of expertise and you're uncomfortable with that, you should get some help. So the presumption here is you have a C compiler and you have an editor. Again, I'm going to use a universal editor. It's freely available. It's sometimes called VI or VIM. As I said, an alternate editor for a Windows system might be Notepad. And what you'll see throughout this course is my home computer, which is so some of you may even have a Unix operating system, either through your university or sitting on whatever box you have. And there are Unix operating systems that can sit under Windows as well as the already installed one for a Macintosh. And what we will use is VI, and VI will be used to write code or data files. And the instructions that we need to use there are fairly simple, but again, it's not the point of the course, and so you should get comfortable with how to use a basic, simple text editor. Again, in this window, we will use the GNU compiler and the GNU command GCC to compile our code. And when you get an idea to write code for a particular problem or something you're interested in or some test, I always say write the code first on paper. Paper and pencil, maybe I'm just old school, lets you think about it, and even what we call hand simulated. So not only do you write it, make sure visually it looks like what you think it is, it looks like a correct or syntax correct, C program and then go through it, step through it, or at least a simple version of it, and see that it gives you the result you expect. You might even start with some sample program that you'll modify, and here's a very simple sample program. It's just int main void curly brace, return 0, semicolon. And when you're finished writing that code in an editor, so I've already written it on paper, I then go and open my editor. My editor command in this case would be VI. I would say VI of sample.c. And typically when I'm writing code for a C compiler, I have a suffix .c that indicates to the compiler that this is C code. And also if it sits in a folder or in a directory, I can recognize it as being source, what we call source C code. Then I'm going to actually make sure the program works as I thought. So we'll call in our GCC compiler. We'll see if there are any syntax errors. When we fix all the syntax errors, we can recompile. The fix is going to have to require use of the editor again. We keep running the program. We either get wrong answers, we go back here, fix, recompile, run, and then finally we should get a behavior we like. That's correct. And then in the GNU compiler, you'll see an output file automatically show up, which is your runtime executable code. You can think of that as machine code. And that file is by default a.out. And the problem with having a.out as your executable is anytime you use the C compiler, that a.out will be replaced if you have compiled a correct C program. So in order to avoid that, you can either change this by moving it to something recognizable, for example, sample exe, or you can do this from scratch by using the GNU command -o means compile sample.c, and then the output should be in sample.exe. And now we're going to actually go over, and in the next